We see the third factor that contributed to the initial response of Thomas was that he required an experience of his own to validate eyewitness testimony. And so in verse 25, he responds to their eyewitness testimony, and he says, essentially, I've got to see Jesus for myself. I've got to touch the mark of the nails. I've got to place my hand into his side, or I'll never believe, Thomas said. Now, when it comes to Jesus, Thomas isn't alone in his way of thinking. In fact, I imagine that many of you have people in your lives that have said something very similar to what Thomas said. Perhaps even yourself before you were a believer. You say, you know what, I've got to see Jesus for myself. Jesus, if you answer this prayer request, or if you do this miracle, if you give me some visible or tangible evidence that you exist, then I'll believe. But listen, personal experience isn't the only way that we validate truth in the real world. And it shouldn't be the only way that we validate the truth regarding Jesus. Think about it. When you think about a criminal trial, does every member of the jury have to see with their own eyes the physical evidence or be physically present for the crime to take place in order for them to say, yes, that truly did happen? Of course not. Members of a jury, they rely on reliable eyewitness testimony that's supported by convincing evidence to come to a conclusion about what's true and what's not. Or think about this. Is a child touching a recently used burner, is that the only way that they can believe that they shouldn't do that? I hope not. As parents, hopefully we testify and we tell our children that if they touch a recently used burner, it will burn them. Now, they can choose to believe that testimony, and despite all the evidence that we provide, they can choose to believe it, they can choose not to believe it, but their unwillingness to accept our testimony doesn't make it untrue that touching a recently used burner will burn them. At some point, they'll likely have that experience. And they'll become believers that touching a recently used burner will burn them. But at what consequence?